Thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm Brooke Warren, Operations Manager for the Book Industry Study Group, and I'm just delighted to welcome you all to today's Supply Chain Lunch and Learn. This is a monthly series that we do to talk about issues in the book industry supply chain. This session is going to be on print strategy and print sourcing. I'm delighted to welcome SHONA Burns of Andrews McMeel, who's our featured speaker today, and Ken Brooks, returning as our moderator and also committee chair for our supply chain committee. Just a couple housekeeping things. The session is recorded and it will be distributed to everyone who's registered. So if you do have to hop off early for any reason, you will get that full recording. We also hold these webinars in meeting format rather than webinar format to just encourage discussion and engagement. So we do ask you to mute yourselves to make sure that there's no background noise that overshadows our speakers today. But do please feel free to raise your hand if you have questions, put things in the chat, and just be very actively engaged. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Shona.
Thanks, Brooke, very much. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm very happy to be here. I think it's a very interesting time in our world, and particularly for our business world and print strategy and print in general. I just want to say that I'm going to come at this talk from my point of view. It's certainly, I've been thinking a lot, as many of my industry colleagues have been, about print sourcing in this day and age, in this climate. So I'm looking forward to a conversation and hopefully a robust sharing of views, and let's see what we can come up with together. So I'm going to see if I can actually move this forward. Great. So let me tell you a little bit about Andrews McMeel. Andrews McMeel is a Kansas City-based publisher, international publisher. We are distributed through Simon & Schuster. And the company has three divisions. The oldest division is the syndication division. And the syndication division produces and provides what you might think of as the funnies, so the cartoon pages for newspapers and websites. And we provide daily cartoons for about 1,300 locations, either, as I say, newspapers or websites. Another division is our trade publishing division, of which I am part of. And then we have one last division, which is our digital division. And Go Comics is probably our largest entity within the digital division, which is a website solely focused on the creators of comics and funny cartoons. So it's a real joy to work for this company. There's a lot of really funny things that happen. Um, we also have a very small business based on producing content for various greeting cards companies. So I think you're probably seeing a theme here in terms of the humor that we are known for. But books are not the only thing that we are known for. We have two main product groups within the publishing division. One is calendars, and we produce approximately 300 calendars a year. We have and probably represent about 30% of the calendars produced in the American retail market. And we produce approximately 175 to 200 books. And you'll see here, just going back to the books, you'll notice the far side, Bill Watterson, who is best known for Calvin and Hobbes. You'll see Magic High, you'll see Big Nate. So children's poetry, trade, gift, humor. That's our main focus. And then in the calendar side, we have again Far Side, Peanuts, Jeopardy, Thomas Kincaid. So some really large licenses within this program. But let's get into the kind of meat of this. Historically, Andrews McMeel has produced both in the US and in China. And we produce calendars mainly overseas because they're pretty hard to produce in this country. And we produce books up until COVID. We were doing a good number of books in the US, but due to capacity issues and changes in contracts, we ended up having to go to China for more of our product. Um, What we're finding now is that 3 years on or 5 years on from COVID, things are changing again. And for many reasons, not just COVID, but for other things that I will get into. The past 5 years, I think it's quite interesting to think about just how things have changed. And even in the consumer and category, the consumer market. And I want to talk about that a little more too, because I think it's a really important understanding to have when you're thinking about your print strategy. But yeah, things are changing, as I'm sure we all can recognize. So here's the buckets that I've been considering. Times and technology have changed. You're now able to produce by web, produce by sheet fed, produce digitally, produce by, in-stock protection, one at a time with POD. I mean, the abilities to print now are, if not limitless, certainly much more expanded than what I certainly started in this industry with. Speed to market is becoming more and more important, and the sourcing that you can do to meet that need is key to business profitability. And I think the last part is about how much collaboration is key. And I don't just mean collaboration with your print partners, I mean collaboration within the organization, within publishing itself. It's no longer, the production department is no longer isolated within the end of line file receiving and being sent to the printer. How you approach your print strategy is really central to how you are able to meet the demands of the business. So as I say, these are my thoughts. I think they meet Andrews McMeel's needs. They could be adopted or certainly considered by other companies, but I'm certainly coming at this from an illustrated book publisher's point of view. So I hope you keep that in mind as I continue to speak. So times and technology, let's just have a quick think about that. Because we have calendars and books, the two product lines have quite different needs. I can tell you for a fact the calendar industry is super interesting because you have a lot of product going through a factory in a very short period of time. It's dated product, so it has to be produced very timely. But on the consumer side, you've got very dedicated fans. So, how many people do you know who buy the same calendar every year and expect the same calendar every year? And by goodness, if you have the different color of blue this year compared to the different color of blue last year, then you're going to hear about it. Um, and additionally, products and the quality of the product is absolutely key. We produce day-to-day calendars, and the last thing you want with a day-to-day calendar is the block suddenly breaking in the middle because the glue's not quite hard enough. So it's really key to have consistency in that type of product. As is with every product, but certainly the calendars have been are quite challenging. And thus, we've always produced our calendars in China, and that continues to be a main source for us for that type of product. Um, and I will say that I've had a very good experience in China. It's extremely efficient. Service levels are very high, and it's quite hard to give that up. It just kind of works. All of the materials are very available, etc., etc. However, I think over the past 5 years, we have been taking a bigger view in terms of can we really be so reliant on China as a manufacturing base? And that is something that we have looked at quite significantly, and I'll share a little more about that as we go on. I think one more thing here I just want to call out in this slide, fragmentation of the consumer is is huge in our world at the moment. Consumers have a constantly dwindling attention to all the types of media and all the types of entertainment that we can provide. And therefore, books are having to fight and even harder for that consumer's interest. And it comes down to understanding your consumer very well as you're looking for acquisitions and having a way of bringing back the information from sales into the acquisitions team is key. But again, technology, as I said, we've got lots of different offerings now. We use all of these. We print web, we print sheet fed. I think one thing I'd like to say here is I think over the past 10 years or probably longer, sheet fed technology has become as fast as web, and web has really stretched to become smaller and produce the quality that sheet fed was known for. So I think the two still have a place, but I think the difference between the two is becoming smaller and smaller. I'm not sure if people would agree with me, and certainly I look for my friends in the print industry to have a comment on that. But to a purchaser, this may be a bit inflammatory, but I don't really care. As long as the price is right and the timing is right, then that's what I'm really going to care about. So when I have people saying, well, we're going to print this sheet fed, am I meant to go, oh, fantastic, that's going to be much better quality? I just don't believe that anymore. And in terms of the digital short run, the color printing that's coming out of digital now is completely and utterly acceptable and equal to many of the products that we've known in terms of sheet fed. So lots of different options. We're using everything. So here's the problem statement that I'm constantly kind of referring to. How can I be economic and efficient? Constantly keep the creator in mind because they have opinions and we are a creator first company as a way, as a philosophy. Be timely in terms of getting to market, and then also consider the geopolitical times that I live in. I have to have a strategy for all of these things in my print production. And it's constantly fascinating, frankly. But I'm going to speak to the last part first, and that's consider the geopolitical times that we live in. Um, so maybe did I get my slides mixed up? Let me just go over here for a second. So over the past 2 years, as I said, calendars have been very focused in China over the past 10 years. But we've been leading our moving of product by the calendar business because of its complexity. There are only several printers that I can trust to really produce those. And you'll see that a difference in 2024 to 2025, it has had quite a big impact in the percentage of work I do in different regions. Um, I hope we can always print in China. I really enjoy the partnerships that we have there. It's well established, the supply chain, their expertise, not just in printing, but in logistics. It just works. And the level of service is, as far as I'm concerned, kind of unmatched in terms of the daily communication I'm able to have. But it's certainly it's changing, and I'm looking elsewhere beyond China. And as you can see in the past year, we've made big strides to actually move elsewhere. I think the USA manufacturing base will grow for us. I think the EU will grow for us, and we'll continue to try and spread risk beyond China. So going back to speed to market, all of these things on this slide drive us. We can no longer rely on normal sell-through or historical numbers in terms of our categories. What one category might do well for 3 years will drop off and change. We're seeing a much faster diminishing of each category, than what we saw even 5 years ago. So where you saw a trend like Magic High back in the day, it would last for about 7 years, whereas a trend now is probably 3 years, if you're lucky. So other than romantasy, of course, but who knows how long will romantasy be around? So I think understanding what the consumer is buying and what they're looking for is part of all of our jobs, not just in editorial, but in production too. You have to understand what you're going to be buying for as you go into the next year. Feedback loops, therefore, are really important within the company, making sure that sales and marketing are attached to editorial, understanding how things are resonating, and then in terms of manufacturing, using that data and understanding how quickly you can get to the marketplace and reducing time is key. Um, so talking about manufacturing times. When you think about the shipping times alone between these different the countries I have here, not only is the shipping time different, but the manufacturing time being offered is different. So, example, I'm seeing a regular 3 week schedule out of Europe. USA um, can be, and this is manufacturing, I've got shipping times here because I wanted to speak specifically to the manufacturing time. I'm being offered 3 weeks in Europe, just as a kind of, yeah, that's what we do. Here it is, no problem. Yep, 3 weeks. In the USA, I'm seeing between 4 to 6 weeks. I have offers of 21 days, but it's not common. China is 5 weeks. Can't really plan for less than that. And you've got a 5 week shipping on top of that. And then Malaysia and Thailand, again, it's 5 weeks and you've got a six week shipping time on that. But of course, I'm paying more for non-China or non-Asian printing. However, I think one of the things that we're really focused on is understanding how much better we can maintain our inventory by using a mix of different locations. So I might start off in America, but then I will do a potential reprint elsewhere and then come back to America when I'm seeing it succeed. I might use digital for a quick, okay, I'm suddenly got 600 orders sitting waiting and I'm not going to get a reprint for another 4 weeks. Okay, let's do a digital short run, bring it in, keep going. Building momentum in sales is so um, key, and keeping that momentum going is frankly my job to make sure that I'm able to fulfill that need. So again, these are the things that I've been thinking about and figuring out how best to approach. Um, I'm kind of bouncing around here. We are using short run digital printing. We are using POD. I think the thing that I would love our POD manufacturers to consider is not all books are built the same. And if I want to use this type of technology, then I am limited to page counts. Not page counts, sorry. I'm limited to page sizes, binding styles, cover treatments, and paper choices. And I have to ensure that my editorial team understand that as we're looking to use multiple different manufacturing types. So if I have to lose a spot varnish or an embossing on a cover, is the author going to get upset about it? And I have to ask that question at time of manufacturing. And I think that can be challenging because it takes time to go back to that author, make sure they're okay with it, or if they're not okay with it, then what does that mean for us with the author relationship? I think what I'm saying here is all integral, and that's really the part that I find additionally fascinating. The things that I am working on internally right now are limiting our trim sizes. I think when I arrived, Andrews McMeel had about 89 trim sizes. I think I've got it down to about 12. But bringing that and making editors comfortable with that is part of the collaboration that's so necessary. And of course, designers and creators along with that. Paper choices, I think editors have been used to several options, and those options just are not as available anymore. You have to limit it to be able to reach the market in the way that you need to reach the market. So making designers and editors understand that is key. And then logistics, dear Lord, let's just start changing our sourcing, and you're going to hear from your operations team because the amount of time it takes to onboard new printers, get them up to speed with your vendor requirements, get all the payment terms in place, and not even the terms, but actually the banks, blah 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 blah. There's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. And then you've got your actual end consumers where your retailers are saying, well, I normally pick up your goods from China and now you want me to pick them up in Malaysia and I can't do that because I don't actually work out of Malaysia and my shipping company doesn't work out of Malaysia. So I'm sorry, I'm going to cancel that order. And you're like, okay, I need to figure that out. So it just takes more time and effort and you have to bring everybody with you. And then in terms of reprinting, yeah, staffing and data management, let's face it, as you increase your number of reprints, if you're keeping your inventory tighter, then it takes more time on not just the production side, but on the design side, and anyone who's actually making corrections to files, making sure you have files set to the right to the right profiles. All of that good work is necessary and additionally adds more time that you're trying to save. So the more work we can do upfront and upstream is going to help support the print sourcing decisions that we're making. And it has to be thought of as a group. It can't just be left on its own. And I'm hearing Matt Kennel in my head about, uh, transparency. I think he's onto something. I think we do have to be more transparent. If I could have more information and data from our sales retailers earlier in the process, then I might not be making as much. I might not be making poor decisions, and I can still be able to provide them everything they need for sales. So. The implications are large. Getting your print strategy right, as well as being flexible enough to make it work for everybody in your organization and your end consumer. So, my last question, how might we do that? That's it. Over to you.
Oh, you don't get away from it that easily. So I stacked up a bunch of questions in chat, had a few others drop in there. Please, as you hear the conversation, feel free to drop further questions in the chat and we'll make them part of the conversation. So Shona, during the crisis period, uh, container costs went like through the roof and availability really
Yep.
dropped as well. How were you able to deal with that?
By losing profit.
Ah, I have a feeling that's going to be an answer to another question I got coming up.
I mean, how would you ever plan for that?
Yeah, there's not another way to get them over here from China,
No, there isn't.
right?
There is
And
not.
the lead time, right? Like when we knew about the increase in prices was within your replenishment interval, your order interval. So it's not like you could have sourced it from some other place.
No, you couldn't. I mean, you could. Well, actually, not at the time. I mean, we lost a major contract in the US that had been signed and sealed, but the capacity was of such value to our partner. It went elsewhere. So, we were challenged in being able to look elsewhere during those times. And if you did manage to find capacity, then you didn't find paper. I mean, I think we have to move beyond COVID. I mean, COVID was an ugly period that I think in some ways the strategy that I'm suggesting right now is I want to have two sources for every single potential printing. Even more if I'm using digital short run. I can't rely on one source anymore. The world is just too complicated. And if we think that's the first pandemic and nothing else bad is going to happen, it's just not true. I mean, it's something else will happen at some time that will make me have to reconsider. So mitigating my risk is an absolute essential focus for us right now.
So with that, with two sources, particularly across regions like Europe and Asia and the US, how do you deal with color matching and paper availability and some of that, or is that less of a concern?
Standardization. I mean, we have several papers at each source that we have approved, which are close enough together that we're happy with. We don't use a lot of really extreme paper types, so we're lucky in that way. And making sure that we have enough paper on hand for a general quantity. I mean, you have to, again, it's pre-planning. I mean, it's planning at the 6 month and year stage rather than at the purchase order stage.
So uh, I put another question in there. There was a story a while back about Random House losing, I think, cookbooks in a container getting washed overboard. Have you ever experienced anything like that?
I have.
And so you just reprint and bring them back, or
Yeah, I mean, it was an insurance claim in the end. This was many years ago and not at Andrews McMeel. But yeah, I have photographs of the container missing off the ship and to actually give to the insurance company, and then just reprinting and bringing it in. The challenge being you lose time and you lose your publishing slot or your on sale date. But yeah, it happens. But I've been print buying for well over 30 years. It's happened to me once. So
oh, okay,
it's not an every week experience, Ken, thank goodness.
yeah, thank goodness. Now, when you're printing calendars, do you normally go for the entire season, or are you able to do reprints?
We do reprints. Yep, again, it's very tight. Data, waiting for the orders or not, waiting as closely as possible to the order date from our retailers is key. But the really good thing about calendars is unless they are brand new titles, and even with brand new titles, you have we've got enough of a track record to know where you'd start and then continue to incrementally print. Um, so it's yeah, you do a first batch and then you keep adding as you get more orders in.
Um, I think, Brooke, you asked this question about investments in EU printing. That showed up in your 2025.
Mm.
Yes, I wanted to ask what was really the impetus between growing in that market when you haven't previously had a printing presence there before?
Manufacturing time, 3 weeks is really great, a great opportunity. 21 days shipping. So I can produce in 6 weeks, which at times is the 6 week. So I can produce and deliver in 6 weeks, whereas some of my US vendors are offering me 6 week schedules.
So would this be high quality color like the Italian printers?
Yeah.
Okay. And have you
Uh,
tried Eastern Europe?
hmm Yeah. Yeah. We've got some really good partners in Eastern Europe too. Um, I think the other thing, Brooke, that I find interesting again, looking at the whole supply chain, logistics, shipping, to your point, Ken, every summer you get a large spike in container costs out of Asia. So, you know, COVID was one thing, but every summer you're looking at a probably doubling or tripling of your container costs. Europe does not have that much of a swing. So you can predict your shipping costs slightly more now. You know, when the next disaster happens, sure, it might change. But that is a nice consistency to have, being able to know that over the summer I could be paying half of what I'd be paying to come out of China.
Kind of tagging on to that question, in your slide, it showed that your US percentage had dropped a little bit, but you
Yeah.
mentioned that you expect it to grow in the
Yeah.
coming year. Can you talk a little bit about what's causing that shift of reinvestment in the US market?
Yeah, it's our change in strategy to try and get closer to exact numbers. And you know, we're in a kind of period where we're trying to figure out regionally what is the right number and what's the right percentage for the business. So as we have defined an even faster turn time need based on data, we are putting more into the US, but I expect to really build out a stronger base in the US once we get all the numbers crunched. And I'll tell you, the number crunching that we've been doing over the past 6 months is a lot, just trying to understand And then, of course, the other part of all of this is trying to reduce the obsolescence at the end. You know, I think one of the questions I have is how useful at this point, and okay, I'm sure somebody's going to have a comment about this. How much use is an individual title P&L? Because it's based on, okay, I think I can sell 10,000 copies. Therefore, my unit cost is going to be X, but the inventory decisions are not always aligned with that initial acquisition P&L. So I think looking at different ways of understanding these numbers and the actual levers and the push and pulls we have within the business is something that we have to become smarter about and educate people about.
Well,
That seems like it would certainly reinforce the need to develop strong partnerships with your printers and move away from just like a one-off vendor experience and really build out those longer term relationships so that you can have more invoices that you're considering at a single time and more of a longer perspective.
Yeah, for sure. And then I'm just when you say that, Brooke, I'm thinking of a situation that happened just 2 weeks ago where my shipping agent suddenly went, "Yeah, we're going to change our invoicing practices. We're now going to send you 3 invoices, and they're going to be one's going to be a week earlier than what you're used to." And I'm like, I don't have the time or admin to approve 3 invoices for one shipment. And like everybody, they're trying to ensure that they have payment earlier. So, when the shipping document, when the ships arrive into port, they actually clear customs when they're still in the water. So they're going to provide an invoice then. And then when it actually hits the warehouse or hits shore, we're going to get an invoice for the accident for the incidentals. And then once it actually hits the end, we'll get a trucking invoice too. So it's madness. And it's not madness. It makes sense for them. It doesn't make sense for me. And that's the type of collaboration I think I'd love to have been asked, hey, how could we figure this out? Because we need this, but you need that. What's the solution? Whereas I think we're all sitting in our silos going, well, this is going to work for me. So good luck, everybody.
on the printing side, are you working under long-term contracts with established pricing scales?
Yes, for many of our product, yeah.
But so you still have some RFP type work, or
Hmm.
okay? And are those like non-standard spec families or things like that, or
Um, no, they're mainly for standardization. It's just that the contracts are frankly getting smaller than they used to be.
okay? And so what's driving you that way versus trying to get more broad scale uh, relationships with printers that can handle like all of the spec family?
Because they can't offer me the timing.
Okay. Is that something that forecasting or sharing your future plans could help with?
Not really, because the forecasting is the part that's challenging.
Yeah,
By the time we get orders from retailers, we are 4 months out from on sale date.
yeah. Um,
And if you're wanting to do, if you do want to print in China and actually get the cost of goods down, then you have to have a longer period of time before purchasing.
that's right. That's where the split print run might work, but that also increases. Then you're going to get 6 shipping invoices and 2 print invoices and all
Yeah,
sorts of other things.
yeah.
You mentioned obsolescence. The Some degree of obsolescence must be justified in terms of lost sales versus obsolescence.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's not going to disappear completely.
Is I think there's a formulation called the newsboy problem. It's probably a newsperson problem these days, where you optimize what you think it is based on your forecast error and all the rest.
Mm-hmm.
Is the inventory team like within your group or a separate group?
They are separate. They are a part of the finance team.
Okay. Do you know if they use those kinds of models in their analysis?
I'm not sure actually. I'll have to ask them. Yeah, it's interesting.
Um, there were a couple of questions about, I'm just jumping around here.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, there were a couple of questions, I think, about getting editorial to agree to trim and paper standardization. How much of that was this is going to increase our resilience? It's actually going to give you stock when you need it, and how much was other factors?
It was mainly that. I mean, really, I think there's two things. There are natural design trends within book sizes. So you might, so I'm thinking of back in the day, probably 20 years ago, I was using 8 by 8 3/4 a lot in another company. It was a size that they had used for many years. It was something that worked for the type of content we were producing. It wasn't terribly efficient in terms of printing, but we had so much of it, it actually did make sense because you could contract it pretty effectively. Um, so some of the specifications that we've agreed with our editors and designers are not truly what we as production people might think of as true economic trim sizes, but they are good for certain types of content. And I think you have to give a little when it comes to agreeing what trim sizes are. They can't all just be about efficiency on the sheet. I think you have to kind of have enough of an array. So we just added a landscape. Actually, no, it wasn't a landscape. We had a landscape. We added a square because we felt there was not a square option. Again, it's not super efficient, but it is because we'll build a backlist with it.
Oh, that's good. So you're providing them like these are the things that work. Choose one and go for it. We can get this
Yeah, yeah.
Is it getting easier or more difficult to work with the editorial design departments on these kinds of issues?
I think it's getting easier because I think we're all aware about um, just how complex the market is at this point. We talk a lot about what the consumer outreach is, how much leverage an author might have, what their platforms are. So I think knowing the opportunity and the risk against that opportunity is becoming part of the acquisition conversation. Whereas when I started, that was nothing to do with the conversation at all. So I think as our times have changed, the acquisition teams have just become smarter around knowing how things will resonate in the marketplace. But it's still, I mean, every month it feels something else comes up. I was just reading recently about the impact of the AI summary on Google pages, so now that there's the summary, I think the number of click-throughs has diminished by like 30% or something massive. So suddenly you're losing another way of reaching someone because there's a summary and you don't have to dig so deep into Google. I mean, that's happening on every single type of outlet. So whether it's social media or whether it's retail, um, your discoverability is being challenged. So I think editors are becoming smarter at understanding that and knowing they have to um, acquire things that will work in multiple ways.
Matt, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I lowered it because I thought we had moved past it, but I just wanted to yeah, say I appreciate a lot of your thoughts here today, Shauna. And one thing that you said about, the overprinting, I think that's certainly an area within forecasting that and within book and issue study group that we're looking at. But you know, what I look at as a book manufacturer is I look at, basically the run-on cost, and it's like every time looking at an individual P&L versus, how much value is there to being able to make that print decision, closer to the end date, and, maybe on a backlist title that's got a real long track record, it's easier to, print offshore. But yeah, just situationally, I just thought I'd make that kind of comment. I've seen more publishers, I think, becoming aware of the fact that in some cases you're overprinting. It's
Yeah,
not, it becomes more than just the P&L.
yeah. I think track records are also are so they change now much faster than I used to, and I think I mentioned that, but you just can't rely as much on historical data. So where a category might have done well 2 years ago does not mean that that category is doing well right now. And so when you're reprinting any author or any title, you have to take that into consideration. And it just stops easy decision making. You have to put everything through a synthesis to understand what the opportunity cost is now. Yeah.
Rebecca asked were you going to add something?
No, sorry.
Okay. Rebecca asked a pretty interesting question about with the smaller range of trim sizes, do you redesign books to fit into the new sizes?
We have not as yet, but I would like to. Um, yeah, there'll be some things that are our I would call our heritage titles that will never reproduce. I have seen more opportunity of changing hardcovers into either jacketed paperbacks, or not jacketed paperbacks, sorry, paperbacks with flaps, and paperbacks. So there is some move towards it, but I would like personally to get a little more aggressive about it.
Oh yeah, that's a title P&L or economic trade-off right there, but
It
it
is for
pays for
sure,
itself.
and an author conversation and probably a recontracting, etc., etc. So
Oh,
you
that's pretty cool.
you have to approach it carefully.
Um, Jay Lingle asked about using like an 80-20 sort of split on the print run. So print 80% of what you think you're going to sell on the long, cheap, or inexpensive sourcing from China, and then 20% either short run in the short run POD or web in the US. Is that an inventory strategy that you're using at all?
No,
And
not at the moment.
and Jay Lingle, I don't know who you are, but if you want to come off mute and ask some more details.
Yeah. Thanks, Ken. Hi, Jonah. I work for Ingram. I'll just say that to begin with. We're starting to see this with a lot of our publishers a little more. This goes from small to the big five. It's just about managing cash flow, and one of the primary things is we're looking at, obviously you're looking at China because it's cheaper, etc. But then, and I think for the smaller publishers especially, they can get underwater chasing that low unit cost. It only actually ends up working if you sell through. Otherwise, you've got inventory costs, as you say, the shipping costs continue to rise, and then you've got, freight in, freight out. So we're starting to see more and more people utilize a slightly smaller print run, factoring that in from a P&L perspective, and then letting POD, or as Ken says, short run take advantage of the rest, so that you are managing inventory more carefully and not getting to a point where you're sitting on a ton of stock. It was more
Yeah,
observational than anything else, Shona.
yeah. I mean, 80-20 seems a bit arbitrary, as I'm thinking about my own books.
Right.
But certainly, yeah, I mean, that's what it's about. Um, you take some risk always. in terms of defining what the quantity is. And you get as close as you can to being confident that the orders or the bogus that you're actually hearing about from the marketplace is going to come through. And then if it doesn't, then once you are on sale date, you're looking very closely to see how it's resonating. And that first month after publication is key. And then you're chasing momentum. That's how we're doing it.
This is kind of what we're doing in K-12 as well. But we started buying 70% coverage for the season, and then as we got closer to where we knew the customers were ordering, then we would either fill in more or not fill in more. And that seemed to work out. But with the changing market dynamics, it's really hard
Yeah.
to time that. So we're moving to more of a continuous planning process.
So Ken, when you were doing that, were you allocating across
Customers
your
or
to your customers?
That's not, it's not really an option for us. K-12 school districts
You
pretty much
can.
say,
Yeah.
they say you get it all here or you're going to pay some pretty significant penalties.
Yeah.
And so it just turned into like a med,
Yeah.
it wasn't
I
a fire drill, it was actually a fire every summer.
Yeah. I think that's something that the trade could certainly consider. I mean, first orders tend to be, I don't know, I've never done the analysis on it, but I think if we were to do an industry analysis in terms of if we asked every retailer to say, okay, if you looked at last year and your first counts or your first orders were X, how much of that did you actually sell or were you planning on selling? And how much did you think you'd send back? Because I think there must be a percentage mix somewhere that we could all agree on.
Yeah. And the thing is particularly with four color, the fixed manufacturing cost penalty is so large. It's always better to do one if you can.
Yes, is it? I would love to have a conversation, Matt. You and I should get together on this. This is not quite as true for Versa, perhaps, but the technology changes that we've seen over the past 15 years in terms of the make ready improvements on print machinery and binding to a certain degree have been immense. I mean, the technology has become so tight. For some vendors, I don't see a huge saving in terms of the make ready cost that I think I should be seeing, and that's probably a bit inflammatory. But is there another way we could spread that make ready cost?
Well, it's not just the make ready cost, because if you've got quantity breaks in your scales, if you took the total cost and ran them back down, you plotted them and ran them back down, there'd be a ton of fixed manufacturing costs buried into those price breaks too. So it could be, I think it was something like $6,000 per form or something like that for like a 32-page signature. I don't remember exactly what it was when I looked at it, but Matt makes a good point. Matt, actually, why don't you jump in with your...
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know if like that might be a function of, if I could see that maybe being a function of if you're tied around one plant on a contract basis, and versus trying to split that up, where some people aren't as strong, maybe you're seeing, but in a lot of ways, I see estimates coming through and look at scales and um, there's if you're not going to sell, in my example, 50,000 units in, a couple of months, and you're ordering that because you think you can produce that in a year, sometimes I look at those, when you look at the unit costs, assuming you sell all 50,000, you get to net that total savings to yourself. It's only if you do that. But once you get up to a certain print quantity with how the actual cost structure works, which is a little different versus sheet fed versus web versus digital, which is much more flat. I think there is something that the industry, yeah, maybe could benefit from a deeper dive into.
Let me divert this away from economics here for just a minute. We've had a few questions about EUDR and sustainability. And I have one in there about tariffs as well, which is back to economics. But how much do you think about sustainability in the way that you source?
A good amount. We have a paper policy that was just created this year. I think for us as an American-based company, we are less sensitive perhaps than we would be if we were selling more into Europe, but we have to be compliant to reach any potential order. I think, I mean, we are on a sustainability journey, and it is definitely, we will always work to be compliant with every legislation. And I think the EUDR is a very complex piece of legislation, as is the EAA, and the GPSR. It's just all been it's been a lot this year. But sustainability is definitely important to us. I mean, when I think about our inventory strategy, we have a couple of people. I'm very lucky to have a woman called Beth Steiner who works with me, who is a sustainability guru as far as I'm concerned. And she understands the legislation and understands and drives towards making us more sustainable every day. And I think, I'm sorry, losing my train of thought. When I think about some of the things that we talk about, I know she is quietly looking and figuring out what our carbon footprint is, even though it's not something that we're focused on. It is something we are interested in understanding so that we can, when the time comes, because I suspect it will come at some point, we will know what the work is we have to do.
I will say as an add-on to that, that Beth is absolutely fabulous. We're working in our sustainability working group to try and create workflows and identify ways in which publishers can better identify their carbon footprint. So if that's something that interests you, I definitely recommend reaching out, Brooke at bisg.org, or to Beth directly, and looking into our sustainability working group for that. And then to just piggyback off of another question that was in the chat, our next lunch and learn for next month is actually going to be on tariffs and trade policy. So if that's something that you're interested in, I highly encourage you to sign up for that, because we'll be talking about that in some depth.
You took the words out of my mouth. I was going to ask Shona how she was thinking about tariffs, and I was anticipating you were going to say it's going to hit our margin or something like that. But how are you thinking about tariffs?
I'm trying not to, Ken, frankly, at this point. Yeah, I mean, I think if I thought about tariffs as much as I was 3 or 4 months ago, I probably wouldn't sleep at night. And I've got myself into a place where if I mitigate my risk, if I look at every opportunity that I could possibly come up with, then I will have some sort of plan B, C, or D. And that's the way I'm thinking about it. If I just focus on tariffs, I'm just going to be a quivering wreck. I might as well think of different options that I can at least have some other game plans. And that's how I ultimately could start thinking about tariffs, because it just seems such a huge insurmountable problem, that we just have to be super flexible, and building out super flexible workflows and sourcing is how we're going to answer it.
Yep, back to resilience and multiple sourcing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's a really good way to conclude our conversation for today. We have 4 minutes. If anybody wants to come off of mute and ask a question, this would be a good time to do it. Like 5-second rule.
Not a question, but a comment. This is Mary Beth from Cengage. We have discovered some exemption codes that cut through the tariffs. Would any of those apply for you, Shona? Have you had a chance to review
Yeah,
those?
no, some of them do for sure, and we are using them. I mean, again, back to paperwork, Mary Beth.
I
Uh,
know.
it's like, okay, how many HTS codes do I need to use to
Uh-huh.
actually I think we're at 4 now, or maybe 3, but it's, yeah, no, we're definitely using some of the exemption codes. Um
Okay.
Still trying to figure out whether tarot cards are really okay or not okay. That's still a that's still a question. If
Educational
you've got the
material.
answer, let me know.
Educational materials for somebody.
Totally.
Exactly.
Right. All right, very good. Well, thank you, Mary Beth. Good to see you. Shona, thank you so much for joining us today. Really great conversation, great
You're welcome.
presentation. Very much
Okay.
appreciate it.
It was delightful. Thank you so much, Shona.
You're welcome.
I've dropped the link into the chat for our next Lunch and Learn on tariffs and trade policy. I've also dropped the link to our supply chain committee's homepage. If those are things that you're interested in, please definitely do follow up with us. We'd be delighted to have your participation. And then after that, just a reminder that this was recorded. And so if you want to see the slides or the recording, revisit any of the conversation that we've had today, we'll get those materials out to you shortly. So thank you everyone for joining us so much. Thank you, Ken, for moderating our conversation today. And hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.